Welcome to the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, episode number 212. Tomorrow, you will wish you had started today. Mongo Wilder.
Broadcasting from the back alley in Hollywood, it's the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, where we show you how to survive and thrive as an indie filmmaker in the jungles of the film biz. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome, my Indie Film Hustlers, to another episode of the Indie Film Hustle Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Today's episode is brought to you by Black Box. Black Box is a new platform and community for filmmakers that transforms them from being workers and people who work for others to being creators and owners of their own content and make passive income from the global marketplace. Black Box currently allows creators to upload stock footage once and get to many agencies, and then allows to share their passive income streams with other collaborators. It's quite revolutionary, and it's a great work-life hack for filmmakers and video creators. Think of it as a side hustle while you're getting your movies and your projects off the ground. For more information, visit blackbox.global. That's www.blackbox.global, and discover how you can start generating extra revenue for yourself. So guys, today we have on the show a very cool filmmaker by the name of Steve Concatelli. He directed a documentary on one of my favorite movies of all time, of course, called Back to the Future. And he made a movie about the restoration of the DeLorean. Now, anyone who's ever watched Back to the Future knows how important the DeLorean is. It is one of the seminal parts of pop culture. And it was dying in the backlot of Universal. I saw it there when I did my tours back in the day. And I was like, wow, it seems so sad. And it's just being tore up by the elements. And he was able to get together with the producer Bob Gale of Back to the Future, as well as some amazing talented artists that were and mechanics who were going to be able to put together and put back together the DeLorean. And the movie is called Out of Time, Saving the DeLorean Time Machine. Now, I wanted to have Steve on the show because I wanted to kind of talk about, we haven't had a lot of documentary filmmakers on, first of all, so I wanted to get a few more of those on this year, as well as to discuss the process of dealing with a big studio with a huge IP, huge intellectual property for Universal, and how he was able to get this whole thing going. He was starting doing the documentary without permission, and then finally got permission, and how he got it onto a Blu-ray special edition anniversary and all this kind of stuff, and how he was able to make money with the film, how he was able to tour with the movie, and different kind of distribution ideas that he was able to implement because of the rabid fan base of the film, of the original trilogy. There's a lot of knowledge bombs in this episode. So if you are fans of Back to the Future, it's going to even be more so. And I think most people listening has seen Back to the Future. If you have not seen Back to the Future, for God's sakes, what's wrong with you? Stop listening to this podcast right now and go watch it on Netflix or Amazon or rent it or do whatever, but you need to watch the Back to the Future trilogy. But without any further ado, here is my conversation with Steve Concatelli. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing just fine. How are you, Alex?
Thank you, brother. Thank you, man. Thanks so much for being on the show. I'm a huge fan of your movie, Out of Time, and I'm obviously a huge fan of Back to the Future. And I thought this would be a beautiful melding of not only geeking out, because we are going to geek out in this episode a bit, but also discovering how you made the movie and went down the road, and your Kickstarter, your distribution plan, and get to the nuts and bolts of actually making the movie. But while we geek out a bit, so what gave you the idea of making Out of Time? Like, how did you even wake up one morning and go, I'm going to make a movie about restoring the DeLorean?
Well, it's interesting. It started back in 2011 when Universal Studios first announced that they were going to restore the screen-used time machine. Mm-hmm. And at the time, to give a brief history, at the time, the screen-used car had really started falling apart. It had been out at the Universal Studios backlot for 30 years. It was not in great shape. And so Universal and Bob Gale made the announcement that they were going to restore it. And I was fortunate enough to be very close friends with Joe Walser, who was the superfan in charge of the restoration. Mm-hmm. And so here you had this phenomenal year-long restoration project that was going to kick off. And, I said, well, is anybody filming this? Is anybody going to turn this into a movie? Because fans would love to see the nuts and bolts of this restoration. And it turned out nobody had any plans to do it. And so, I kept asking, who's doing this? Who's doing this? And finally it just kind of dawned on me like, crap, I guess it's going to be me then.
Right.
And so I took it upon myself to just start documenting the entire restoration in the hopes of possibly turning it into a film, which we then did.
And now, how did you get Bob Gale and Universal involved and actually get them to say, hey, you're official. We give you the stamp of approval?
That was a very, very long and nerve-wracking process, to be honest.
I could imagine.
Well, yeah, because I didn't work for Universal Studios. And so, when I started shooting it, it wasn't exactly, done with official authorization. I'll say that much. Sure. It was done. I was part of the restoration team. I was documenting it. And that was fine. But, turning it into a film is something that was an entirely next level. Like when you work with a studio, there's approvals and IP and licensing. And there's a lot of things that back then I had no concept of.
And they are none. And Back to the Future and the DeLorean, it's fairly popular IP.
Yeah. It's among their most popular intellectual property. And so we did it very slowly and very methodically. And essentially what it boiled down to is Bob Gale. Now Bob is the co-creator of the Back to the Future trilogy. He wrote them, produced them, and he is the godfather, even to this day, of all things Back to the Future. So if any product, anything Back to the Future gets approved, it goes through him. He's the authority. And luckily, Bob was spearheading the restoration. He was directly in charge of it. So as the restoration progressed, I got a chance to meet Bob and know Bob. And we put together halfway through the restoration, we did like a little 5-minute, here's what's going on with the restoration update that Bob hosted. So I shot footage of him and we got to know each other and kind of test the waters to see what kind of reaction, the restoration footage would get. But then as we progressed and I got further and further into filming, it became clear, like, look, I really need to get some official endorsement from Universal. Because, by the time a year-long restoration was done and then, say, a year of interviews, I was 2 years into a project I wasn't even sure I could produce legally. And like, oh, boy, what are we going to do? So Bob sat me down with Universal's licensing team, their marketing teams, to essentially make a pitch for me to say, look, he knows what he's doing. He's been doing this a long time. And, basically Bob gave me his official endorsement. But even then, I don't think Universal was quite on board until 2015. I mean, that's three years that I wasn't sure. And then that's when they asked me to possibly put together something for the 30th anniversary Blu-ray that came out. And they said, do you have enough footage that you can cut together maybe a 15-minute featurette? I said, sure, no problem. And I'm sure Universal Studios was afraid that, I was just going to make them look terrible because of the shape of the car. And then I sent them a quick cut. And they saw it, and as soon as they saw my movie, as soon as they saw it, they're like, "Okay, we totally get it. We're totally on board." Because it's not about blame. It's not about criticizing this part. It's not about fans being snipey at each other. It's about celebrating this great car and everybody coming together to get it restored. And once they saw it, all their fears were gone. They said, "Yep, we'll license this. You can have access to everything you need." I got all the proper permissions and all that stuff, and we were off like a shot. But it was I won't understate it. It was 3 years of very nervous. Is this going to happen? Because all it would have taken was one phone call from Universal's legal department, and boom, the whole film would have been shut down. And this is after 2.5 years of my time. So it was a tough, long road that I'm sure a couple other indie filmmakers out there understand.
Oh yeah, I know a few of them.
And it could have easily broken the other way. I had more than a few sleepless months about that, to be honest.
So Bob Gale was basically, you were Donnie Brasco and Bob Gale was Al Pacino.
Yeah, that's basically a good way to put it.
And he's fine. He's with me. We're good. So he got you in the door, but it was your work that kept you in the door.
Correct. I mean, Bob, that's exactly what it was. He opened the door, and he wouldn't have gone to bat for me if by then I hadn't already proven myself as a professional, and the story I was trying to tell. And once Universal saw it, they embraced it. So definitely, but it took a lot of convincing and a lot of baby steps. And And boy, you could do a whole episode just on the difficulty of trying to license intellectual property from a studio because I'm a fan. Like when I started this movie, I truly had no idea of what it took to make a movie like this, because I'm sure a lot of your listeners are thinking, oh, you make a movie about the time machine, you go and shoot your footage and you own it. So you just go and make a movie. But it turns out not to be the case, because the car is owned by DreamWorks, or a subset of Universal for the intellectual property, and then Universal Studios owns the film rights, and then you have to get approvals from the producers and any actors that appear in the footage, and I had no concept of how to do any of that stuff.
Well, let me ask you a question though, and this is now we're getting into a little bit of the weeds as far as legal and documentary is concerned, but documentaries do have a lot more leeway than narrative do, in the sense that I can remember Fahrenheit 9/11. Where Michael Moore was basically ripping apart the president of the time, George Bush, and he was using him in his documentary, and he obviously didn't get any permission for that.
No.
How does it work? Can't you just document something and release it to a certain extent, or not?
Well, I bet if I wanted to put it on YouTube, I probably could have gotten away with it. But I wanted to release it and try to make money off of it. And that's an entirely different ballpark, because if you're trying to monetize somebody else's intellectual property, that's a line you have to have legal permission for. And to be honest, I was getting to know Bob, and I have tremendous respect for Universal. I wanted to do it the right way. I wanted Universal Studios to endorse the film and be a part of it and not fight against it. And I didn't want to just try to release it as like a fan documentary. I wanted their stamp of approval so that the world would know, look, Universal has declared this the official Time Machine documentary, and it's quality content. And thankfully that's what happened. And and the Blu-ray in 2015 really kind of jump started that, because once I had a little 15-minute featurette on the official Blu-ray, I was an official part of the franchise, and that helped that. But it still involved, licensing and paperwork and attorneys and title clearances. Even the title of my film, which is Out of Time, like the Time Machine license plate, even that was just like, when I started, can I use that? Is that owned by somebody? Does Universal own that? Does the DMV own that? Who do I have to ask? And all these questions had to go down this infinite rabbit hole of minutia to feel like, okay, somebody at Universal said it was okay, I use this, and it's so far out in the weeds when you're producing these indie docs that it boggles the mind. You spend like 75 or 80% of your time dealing with things that have nothing to do with making your movie, as I'm sure you can attest.
Yes, absolutely. No, I was working on a show for Hulu, and the characters, the director and the producers wanted to get some Universal characters on some T-shirts, like the They Live. And the Bride of Frankenstein.
Put on the glasses.
Yeah, exactly. Because the whole episode of that series was about guys putting on glasses. So it was kind of like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And they got it. It was fairly simple, honestly, to get a right to get the They Live logo or whatever put on a T-shirt. And you have to make it yourself. It has to be custom. You can't sell the T-shirt. There was some paperwork. And then there was some back and forth, and they wanted some other people to we kind of own that one, but it's also a quarter owned by somebody else.
Exactly.
So you might have to go somewhere else. So exactly like you're talking about, like the DeLorean is owned partly by DreamWorks or Spielberg at that point, right?
Yeah, it's a subset of one of the conglomerates, and somebody, the appropriate person at the appropriate subset company had to have an email that says, yes, we authorize this. And again, they don't know who I am. I'm just a fan trying to make a film, and studios, and rightfully so, are very leery about, fans saying, hey, I want to make a movie about your movie. Let me use your IP or your footage.
Sure.
And so, it's I'll say this. If you're making a unique documentary about something like unrelated, go for it. But to make a feature doc about a very famous feature film is among the most difficult and dumbest things you could try to do.
Well, there was a movie, the shark is still working. The shark is still working, which was legendary because it took forever for it to come out. Like, they had interviews with Roy Scheider before he died, and they had Spielberg, they had Dreyfuss, they had everybody. and Universal was like, I don't know, and this and that. So everybody was like, when is this coming out? I remember that, and then finally it got released like on a 30th anniversary or whatever, 40th anniversary of release on a DVD somewhere, and we finally got to see it, which was a great doc. But same thing. But you were a little bit better.
Well, I appreciate it, but I think they had the same thing too, where when the anniversary of Jaws came around, the studio was looking for content that tied into that. And here, these fans had essentially made this entire film for them. Mm-hmm. Like, why don't we just give them the okay to release that, And my situation on Out of Time was kind of similar, where back in 2011, when the restoration started and I started shooting footage, I was already thinking, look, in 3 years, they're probably going to do a 30th anniversary release, and then they're going to want some of this content.
Right.
And sure enough, in 2015, Universal called, hey, we're thinking about a Blu-ray. Do you have something? And I'm like, I got you covered. You believe me?
I'm looking at your Blu-ray as we speak, sir.
Yeah. So
I've got that 30th anniversary.
Yeah. And I have a nice little Out of Time featurette on there, which, as a fan is to think that something that I did completely by myself, like my own time with my own crappy camera, editing it on my own crappy home edit system, is on the official Back to the Future Blu-ray, like behind Doc Brown, is mind-boggling. I still can't believe it, but it happened.
Now you also started a Kickstarter campaign, and you launched the Kickstarter campaign, which was fairly successful.
It was very successful, actually. Yeah.
Now, how did you prep and launch the Kickstarter campaign? Because I did my own crowdfunding campaign for my feature film. And this is it could be a beast, but you also had a wonderful audience to tap into. So how did you prep it and launch it?
Yeah, well, Kickstarter is its own separate nightmare. I'll just start by that. All right, Kickstarter, for all the people who think, look at all that free money. No, if I had simply gone to work every day and worked my regular job, I would have made far more money. That's the simple truth.
Amen.
And Kickstarter is a nightmare, and even like. Your worst fear with Kickstarter is that you won't succeed. Your second worst fear is that you do succeed.
Why is that?
Well, because if you're wildly successful, suddenly, like I found myself with 600 bosses, all demanding, like, when is this going to be done? What are you doing? What's going on? And it was just like having 600 managers emailing me all the time, asking questions, and the vast majority were great, but you do get some squeaky wheels. And I was very, very sensitive because first I wanted to have a good Kickstarter, but second is that I didn't want anybody bad-mouthing me to Universal Studios. Right. Because whether I accepted it or not, by having this film, and Bob Gale was in my Kickstarter video, so by having his endorsement, whether I like it or not, represent Back to the Future, I represent the franchise, and I represent the studio. Mm-hmm. And I took all that very seriously. So every time I would answer a question or deal with the public, I did it professionally, straightforward, in the most kind of corporate, appeasing way that I could, because the last thing I wanted to do was to have, Bob get some angry email from a fan. Who's this Steve guy and what's he doing? And he's ruining Back to the Future. Like that would have been the death of my film.
Right.
But to backtrack, in terms of what we did, we set the bar. Our goal for the film was $25,000, which I thought was pretty reasonable. Mm-hmm. And I didn't think we'd hit it. And Joe Walser, who is the head of the restoration, and he's the main guy in the film, he was very involved. And one thing Joe does, aside from making time machines, is he's a master at marketing. Mm-hmm. And he said, Steve, we're going to blow the doors off it. And I didn't believe him. And he goes, trust me. Within 24 hours, we hit our $25,000. One day. And then I think we ended around 75,000, which was 3 times our goal, which is great. Mm-hmm. But nervous. And the way we prepped for it was, I would say not enough, but but it's not exactly true. I benefited because during the entire restoration, Joe had set up a Facebook page for the Time Machine restoration team. Mm-hmm. And it was for fans to kind of track the progress. And Joe was very tied into all the Back to the Future online Facebook pages, the big ones, all of them. Mm-hmm. So he already had access to a very large, very rabid Back to the Future audience. And that was the reason my Kickstarter was successful. If I had tried building it from scratch, it would have taken a year, just to try to get up to speed and building word of mouth. But Joe had been cultivating this because of the restoration for 2 years, and we had been putting videos online So his own Facebook page had 75,000 people, and then the other Back to the Future pages had millions.
Right.
So once we decided to launch our Kickstarter, he posted everywhere on all the Facebook pages for Back to the Future, check this out, it's official. And then when people clicked on our Kickstarter, there was Bob Gale sitting right next to me in my Kickstarter video. And Bob is essentially saying, you can trust this guy. He's going to finish this project. You can trust your money with him. And that put a lot of people over the top because, fan docs are a dime a dozen. It's easy for anybody to do it, but to have the creator sitting there next to me endorsing me gave
huge.
Yeah, it gave it a lot of credibility. And then the other thing we did that was excellent is we had fantastic Kickstarter giveaways, like tiers that nobody else had. And the most popular one was we made small 5x7 desktop display shadow boxes with pieces that were taken out of the time machine that were too damaged to put back in. So we turned them into collectible display cases that were with a COA signed by Bob Gale and Joe Walser. So essentially you could own legally a piece of the time machine for real.
And what was the cost of that? Just curious.
Way too low. We priced them at like $200.
Oh, I would have bought that.
And they sold out in like 15 minutes. And then we did a second round of them. Like, I think I could have charged $400 for those suckers. I had no idea.
No, you would have probably, you could have easily, depending on what it is, you could have probably 500 to 1,000 a pop and all day.
Yeah, we could have. And, in retrospect, hindsight's 2020, but again, it wasn't about trying to rake them over the coals. It was just to get out and stuff, and they were wildly popular. We had a really cool poster. I had some artwork that I had taken of the finished car, but we had stuff that wasn't just the movie. It was real Back to the Future, like official type stuff, and it just blew the doors off. So it was. And then at the end of the Kickstarter, I'm sitting there thinking, oh God, now I have to fulfill all this nightmare stuff, which
I know. That's the stuff.
And I fulfilled everything myself.
Right.
Like I didn't have a fulfillment company. I boxed and shipped, 600 individual items to our backers across the world. That's an education in itself. And believe me, while you're sitting there boxing up like out of time license plates at 2 a.m, you're thinking to yourself, man, I should have just gone to work. I should have just gone to work and gotten a paycheck instead of doing this nonsense. It's kind of leading. It's just, and I know we all go through that. Every indie filmmaker has that same story about just like how much of a nightmare it is. And it's like a boot camp brotherhood in that regard.
No, there's no question. It is fairly brutal. And at your level, I can only imagine. And again, you had such a responsibility because you were representing Back to the Future. So It's not like another little indie movie that no one ever heard of. Like you're doing an official doc.
Yeah, and not just that, but I couldn't pull the plug. Like, I wanted to quit the film about a dozen times over, the years just because it was exhausting and too much work and just a drain. But you can't, because I am representing this giant franchise and I have to represent the best of what it is.
How long did it take you to from start to finish?
About a little over 4 years, which at the time I thought that was forever. And then as I met other indie filmmakers, I realized that's on the short end of indie filmmaking time.
Yeah. Docs can go for a while.
Yeah. No I've got friends who've been making docs for 7, 8, 9 years and they're still not done. So 4 years felt like a long time, but it was actually about right on par with most. And considering how much I did by myself, that was, I think that was a pretty decent schedule.
Now, and you do come from an editing and post-production background.
Yeah.
Now you wouldn't have been able to make this movie unless you were the editor.
Yeah, I don't think so. I've been a professional, television editor in Los Angeles for about 12 years now. So, I knew that I needed to edit it, not just for myself, but because I had over 120 hours of footage.
Oh my God.
And it would have been too hard for anybody else to get up to speed on where the stuff was.
Yeah. You were shooting it as well.
Yeah. Because I shot it. And so I knew kind of where stuff was. I knew how the restoration progressed. And then I shot all the interviews and then I went through and logged all the interviews. So I knew where all the sound bites were. And I know several other friends who are top-notch professional editors, but it would have taken them weeks just to try to get up to speed to find anything. And then, after working 12 hours at their day job, the last thing they want to do is come home and try to cut my film, and and I couldn't have afforded any of them even if they wanted to. So it fell on me.
Now, can you explain to the audience, and this is something I preach about a lot, about tapping into an existing fan base when you're making a project, because it's so invaluable. I mean, I know, yes, and a lot of people are like, oh, he's making something for Back to the Future that's Monster's fan base. I'm like, yes, but the concept is still the same. Is if you went out to create a product that was going to be sold to a audience, and you knew what that audience wants, and you gave that audience what they wanted, and it's that concept can go from narrative to documentary. But can you explain the power of that?
Well, I think it would be hard to make a documentary if you didn't already identify your fan base and who you're trying to appeal to. I mean, you're right. Back to the Future has a gigantic fan base, and not just that, but sci-fi fans tend to be very technically adept. Mm-hmm. You know, they're online. They consume digital media. They like Blu-rays over DVDs. Or digital download and streaming. So they're very active online, and that's definitely the Back to the Future fan base. And trying to tap into that is essential. I don't know if I could have made the movie without it. But even then, even with the gigantic fan base that they have, it's still difficult because my film from the outside it's a niche film. It's a film about a car, where the car and a restoration, is
arguably it's the car.
Yeah, the car. And a lot of people, you hear that, you're like, oh, it's it's like an episode of Monster Garage where they're wrenching on a car for an hour. It's just like, well, no, and to try to explain what it isn't. Like, oh, is it a documentary about behind the scenes of the filmmaking? No, that's not what this is. This is about the history and restoration of the screen use time machine. And so even that cuts back on the potential audience within Back to the Future that you can apply to. And you want to make your audience as big as possible. And thankfully they had a very big fan base, but trying to build it from scratch, I don't know if I could have done it.
Well, then also, I mean, you're right, because you like, perfect example. I always use this example: a vegan chef movie.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. It's like you're like, these people are interested in cooking. Like, well, no, it's cooking, and people are interested in cooking, but it's vegan cooking. And now within vegan cooking, there's raw vegan cooking.
Correct.
There's vegetarian. There's paleo. There's all sorts of other subgenres of the larger cooking. So same thing goes with here. There's a Back to the Future fan, and then there are fans of the DeLorean and would like to see that. So that it is big, but it's still a smaller subset of the fan base.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's, when you're making this film, you have no idea how big or how small that subset's going to be. And that's one of the biggest risks of indie filmmaking is when you take on a passion project, you're in it to the end, and it could fly and it could flop, and you just kind of have to ride it out, and whatever happens, happens.
Now, when you finish the movie, so the movie's done now.
Okay.
How did you market?
Thank goodness.
Thank God, it's over. It's done.
It's over. Woo!
I've given birth. I'm done.
Yeah.
Did you distribute the film yourself? Did you market the film yourself, or did you have Universal help you? How did that whole process go?
Universal didn't help market the film itself because, and this is the legality of a major studio. I had licensed footage, but my film wasn't an official Universal Studios film. Mm-hmm. The featurette on the 30th anniversary Blu-ray was, but when it came time and I made my feature-length standalone version of the film, they were hesitant to promote it because, oh, it's not one of our films and blah, blah, blah. They did give me some shout-outs on their Facebook page, which was great. But in terms of marketing, actually a lot of that was, once again, Joe Walser. It was him motivating and kind of, gathering the troops on the Facebook pages and other social media platforms to get the word out to all the big Back to the Future Facebook pages and user groups. And I did some discussion on the Prop Replica Forum. Those guys, they love props.
So that's that's a whole other subgenre too. Like,
props.
This is the ultimate prop.
Yeah. But in terms of distribution, I actually have a domestic distribution company for North America. Mm-hmm. And so I handed over the actual, creation and distribution and getting on all the streaming services. They handled that.
Okay.
And again, that's a whole other subject is, distribution, distributor versus going with an actual domestic distributor.
So if you don't mind.
And I'm still walking through that. for international.
So let me ask you a question then, and you can say I don't want to talk about it, or you can answer it. Do you think that because if you would have come to me and I would have been consulting you on this project, and you would have come to me like, Alex, I have this movie, it's about Back to the Future, about the machine, time machine. What do you think I should do? Should I try to self-distribute this, or should I go through a distributor for domestic? And I would have told you 110% to go self-distribution, purely because you had such a fan base that would have turned up for this. Because for international is different. International, absolutely. But for self-distribute, for domestic, which is what I did, and I had nowhere near the fan base of Back to the Future, and have been fairly successful with it. I think you could have done gangbusters. So I'm curious on why you chose that route, because it was what year was it when you finally released this?
The feature came out last year, 2016.
So distributor was around, self-distribution was a thing.
Oh yeah. It was a thing. I looked into it.
So what was the reasoning behind you choosing a traditional distributor versus a self-distribution outlet? And also, do you, and I'm not sure if you want to answer this, are you happy with your choice?
Fair enough. Well, I won't mention my distributor by name, but,
sure.
At the time my thinking was is that because of the subject matter, it was, car based, and it was kind of the way I produced it was kind of modular. I have a TV background. I was really hoping to also get it on television, and to do that, the distributor I went with had a very solid reputation for indie docs, high profile indie docs. I vetted them because I've heard horror stories about terrible. Ooh. So believe me, I did my work. I vetted them against several people and industry people I trusted to make sure that they had an actual reputation, and then. But I wanted to try to get them on television rights because I felt it was a great property for the Back to the Future trilogy screenings on TBS. Okay, here's an extra hour of awesome content that ties in.
Sure.
And I didn't really have the method to do that myself. That was the next level up of distribution beyond me.
Sure.
And I needed help for that. And to be honest, I had done so much of this film by myself that I was ready to ask for some help.
Yeah.
I didn't so much. I dropped the ball on so much because I was doing it by myself and details missed that I didn't want to screw up my distribution. So I was like, I want to hand it off to a group of professionals who know how to get the marketing out there, the messaging, who know the easiest way to get these produced for the cheapest way. And it was just, it had everything I was looking for at the time. And so that's what I went with. I mean, now would I choose different? Yeah, it's been about a wash. I have friends who have done distributor. I hear decent things, and I would certainly consider them next time around. But for this one, it just seemed like the best way to go for the situation I was in.
And then now you went through somebody else for international?
Actually, I just went around and around. I had a company in LA that wanted to distribute internationally, and then my domestic distributor's like, great, go sign up. It'll be awesome. And then they gave me what they were looking for. And what they wanted was outrageous expenses, just outrageous.
You mean as far as how much it goes to the can and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Like their caps were just, ridiculous. More than I would ever make ever. And I'm just like, no.
Right.
So now, now I'm actually looking at, I was on the phone with the distributor just a couple of weeks ago in terms of, do I want to do that or for international, can I just put it on Vimeo, which I can do by myself? And I'm going around and around with all that stuff right now. Still.
Right. Well, when we get off this interview, I'll talk to you a little bit about that. See if I can help you out. So can you? Did you tour at all with this film? Did you go to conventions? Did you do anything like that?
Yeah, I did actually. I went to a couple of the comic conventions where we screened the film, and then I gave a couple Q&As. I went to San Jose Comic-Con, Philly Comic-Con. I went to Salt Lake Comic-Con a couple of weeks ago. And then I went to DeLorean DCS, which is the DeLorean convention that they have every 2 years. I went and spoke there and showed the film. So not like a full-fledged tour, but enough.
Right.
enough that I'm tired of flying all over talking about it. But yeah. And that was great. Like the convention stuff is fun, and especially when Back to the Future had a large representation at all those conventions I went to. Like I went to the ones that Chris Lloyd was at, that Michael J. Fox was at. So there was already just a huge Back to the Future fan base there.
Right.
And that's why I selected those.
Now, did you sell anything there while you were there, or was it
I did.
just okay?
No, whenever I went, I always had a table, and I would sell some copies, and some days were more successful than others. Most of the time you sit there like, the guy at the table with 20 copies of his movie he's trying to peddle.
Dude, I've been there. I've been there many times. It's brutal.
Yeah, you're that guy,
right?
But I always tried to at least hedge my bets. So Terry and Oliver Holler, they drive around the country in their Back to the Future time machine, raising money for the Michael J. Fox Foundation, and they're very well known, and they're at all the conventions. So if I was at a convention with them, I would try to get a table close to them because there would be all the fans around the car, and I tried to parlay as much as I could. But even then, it's still hard, and breaking through and letting people know what my film was always the biggest hurdle. Just like, what is this film? What is it about? And that's, I could list 1,000 things that I did wrong on this film, and cutting through the clutter and having a clear title and letting fans clearly know what your film is about. It got a little muddy in there, and I'm still trying to. What's your movie about? I've never heard of it. What is it?
Right.
It happens.
Now, did you get to meet Bob Zemeckis at all? I don't remember if he was in the doc or not.
No, Bob Zemeckis was not in the doc. I met Bob very briefly once a few months ago at a Back to the Future, an unrelated thing. But the only people I've met, I know Bob Gale very well. I met Claudia Wells, who was Jennifer Parker. I know her pretty well.
Okay.
I met Chris Lloyd. I met him a few times. Tom Wilson. Never met Michael J. Fox though, because he was never at the same conventions that I was at. But if there's ever a Back to the Future thing in Los Angeles and they're all there, I'm sure I will be there and get a chance to meet them.
Oh,
it's cool, but again, like, you're in it for so long. After a while, you're like, yeah, it's cool, but I'm okay sitting this one out.
No, after you're on the same project for years and years and years, because for you, it's not just a year that the movie's been out. You've been on this half a decade.
Yeah, easy. Yeah. And even now, we're still promoting it, and Back to the Future still continues to be popular. And they're always talking about, putting up fan events in the upcoming years. They did a huge 30th Back to the Future fan event in 2015. I don't know if you were a part of that at all, or if you went to it. If not, you missed it. It was put on by Joe Walser, like the same guy who did the restoration. Of course, he's the one to put on this massive, 5-day Back to the Future super fan event. And so, we were out at the Puente Hills Mall where they had a big, they had a big Twin Pines Mall sign built and put in the same place, and they had Doc's truck, and you get pictures in front of it. I mean, it was like fan insanity.
That's like that's like Mecca for Back to the Future.
It was
like going to that mall. And it's still there.
Oh yeah, the mall's still there, and not only that, but they screened the movie in the mall, like in the parking lot there, and then of course when they have the scene, with the terrorists, they reenacted it live in sync. So Marty drives the DeLorean's driving around the crowd, and the VW's chasing around, and there's 1,000 fans just screaming their heads off. It's just like this is just insanity. It's so surreal you can't even believe it's actually happening.
That must just be insane.
Yeah, it was mind blowing, and 10-year-old me, growing up in the Midwest and seeing Back to the Future on the screen, if he saw that, he'd be like, well done, old Steve. Well done. That was a dream come true.
Now, did you, I know you've talked to Bob a lot and you've been involved with Bob a lot. Did you discover any inside stories about the making of Back to the Future you could share?
Oddly enough, no, I really didn't. And actually at the same time, Cassine Gaines put out a book, which was We Don't Need Roads. I think it was called The Back to the Future History, which had all those stories. So I just read his book. These are the stories I didn't know. But gotcha. But with Bob, I honestly tread pretty lightly.
Sure.
When I'm around him, I try to be very cautious of his time, and I try to be very respectful because he's still working. He's still a very busy guy. He's got 1,000 things to do, and I try to be cautious, and I try not to do the fan stuff. And you know what I mean by that.
I've been around celebrities or fans, and imagine when you're working with a person you idolize, or you're working with someone you have a tremendous amount of respect, and you just want to kind of geek out to.
Yeah,
it's tough, and trust me, I've been in a room with huge celebrities of movies that I've you grew up with, and I just want to go, can I take a picture of you? Come on, I just want to take a picture. Can you sign this for me? Like, but you can't because you're a professional.
Yeah, and I crossed over from that fandom into professional, Back to the Future filmmakerdom, and you don't want to. He gets the fan stuff all the time at the conventions, and that's great, and he loves it. But when I'm around him, I want to be the professional, and every time I would contact him, it's because I needed help with something.
Sure.
Bob, what do I do? Universal's not calling me back. What should I do about this? And
right.
it was mostly like, I'm in trouble, Bob. What am I going to do?
Right, as opposed to, so Bob, how was it on the first day of shooting?
Yeah, no, like every now and then he'd be telling those stories while people were in the room, and I would listen. But I never really went down that road. One thing I did say to him though is when I was in production on it, and I was pretty far along, I said, Bob, making this film it's the hardest thing I've ever done. I had no idea just how insanely hard it would be, and he shakes his head and he goes, yeah, like nobody understands how hard it is to produce a film. And Back to the Future was a terribly difficult film to produce, especially with Eric Stoltz, and they had to reshoot a bunch of it. Like, I put myself in his shoes being like a 32-year-old producer with this giant film and millions of dollars bleeding out, and like, you're never going to make another movie again if this bombs. Like the pressure he must have been under. I think about
the Bobs as they call them.
Yeah. I kind of think about that and empathize about that because my film is not even on the same level, but it's still stressful and hard. And I think that's why Bob and I kind of got along, because he understands that what being a producer is, and the sacrifice and the troubleshooting and just the misery that's involved with it, because he's done it.
It is the misery. It really is. And for people who don't know that are listening, if you watch Back to the Future, that Michael J. Fox was not the original Marty McFly. It was Eric Stoltz, and they'd shot like
a third of it, I think.
A third of the movie with Eric Stoltz, and you see some of that in the behind the scenes on the Blu-ray, and the call had to be made that Robert Zemeckis had to go to Spielberg and go, look, we got to recast, and oh my, can you imagine?
No, I can't imagine that conversation at all. Just the heartache, or even like when they're shooting with Eric Stoltz, great actor, but just imagine looking at your dailies, just going to yourself, fudge, this movie's going to be bad.
This is not, he's great, but he's not good for this.
And just imagine that sinking feeling, of like, are we ever going to work in this town again? I have nothing but tremendous empathy for them as producers now. And, all of us who have been indie producers, because it's such a hard damn job that you can't even begin to describe how hard it is.
Yeah, when we're indie guys, so it's a bit different. We do have pressures, but I cannot imagine the pressures of millions of dollars.
Yeah, totally.
It just on top of you in a studio, and a concept like Back to the Future, which was it was a pretty out there concept.
Yeah, it was
without question.
Yeah, but again, what's great about Bob is he's very producery. Where I'm like, Bob, I'm making this film, and his opinion is just kind of like, what, go for it, give it a shot, give it a try. And that's such a producer thing to say, just throw it up against the wall and see what sticks. Don't edit yourself, don't stop yourself from trying it. Just go and try it and see what happens.
Now, why do you think Back to the Future is such a classic and has touched so many people?
See, you're getting into fandom now.
I told you I was going to geek out a little bit.
I know, but I think everybody listening who's a fan knows the answer to that already, and it's just because it's a timeless story. It's a sci-fi movie. It's a romance. It's an action movie. It's all these different movies combined into one, and every line of the script is perfect, and it's tight, and it just propels the story forward every single second. Not a second wasted on screen. And even when I saw it and I was too young to understand the going back and visiting your parents stuff, like that time machine, man, just like still to this day, when I see those scenes, like my heart still skips a beat, and I've sat in that car hundreds of times, and like, I still like get, I feel my pulse race just because of how cool it is. And, my wife teases me, and just like, how can you even sit and watch this movie after all the times you've seen it making your film? And I'm like, cause it still excites me.
It is for me. I remember going to see it in 1985.
Yeah, me too.
I remember going to the theater, seeing it, and my mind being absolutely blown. You know, there was that wonderful time in the 80s that so many great movies were made, like 81. It's just so many great movies. 85, Summer of 85 was amazing. Summer of 84.
Yeah, you're talking my language now. Like, 'cause I was 10 when Back to the Future came out. So I was just a little on the young side, but I was still in that sweet spot for all those awesome 80s movies. I mean, between Ghostbusters, Raiders,
Gremlins,
Back to the Future, Gremlins,
Goonies,
and then Goonies. But here's another one that it's one of my Joe Walser. It's one of our favorites, and nobody ever talks about it. Explorers.
Oh, it's amazing. I love Explorers.
Like, so many people don't know Explorers at all, and yet that's one of my favorite quintessential 80s teenager, films. I love everything about that movie.
So I would also throw Flight of the Navigator in there.
Yes, Flight of the Navigator.
And I would also throw in Monster Squad.
Yeah, Monster Squad, absolutely.
Like, toss those guys into because those are also lesser known. Yeah, because the Goonies took over. But now we're geeking out in the 80s movies, and I could talk about 80s a whole episode on the 80s movies.
What's funny is actually, in a way, Goonies kind of kicked off my whole out of time movie. In a way, I owe it to Goonies.
Why?
And I'll tell that story real quick. In 2010, before I knew anybody, actually it was before that, but I had put together a parody trailer. You know, when the mashups were really popular. Well, I did a mashup. I did a mashup of Goonies meets Pirates of the Caribbean.
Okay.
And I'm a professional editor, so what I did was I took both films, professionally digitized them, and cut together like a professional trailer. And it looked real. And it was called Goonies of the Caribbean. And when you watch the trailer, it has a plot. Like, the Goonies discover, the ship, and then the pirates come out, and it was this whole thing, and it was really well done, and it was popular online. And in fact, I got an email from Dick Donner one day telling me how much he liked my trailer, and he's just like, "And remember, Goonies never say die." And I'm just like, did Dick Donner just make me a Goonie? I'm like, I'm calling it. Like, yeah, he did. But that story aside, one day I get an email from a guy who's just like, "Hey, you like Goonies?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "Check this out." And he sent me a photo of Corey Feldman as an adult sitting in a time machine. And I said, "Who are you? And where is that?" And he goes, "My name's Joe Walser. It's my time machine." And I'm like, "I have got to meet you." And then like 2 days later, I was at his condo checking out his time machine, and we've been friends ever since. And then
I've heard that before. I was at his condo checking out his time machine.
And Joe ended up as the head of the restoration, but that's how I met, is because Joe saw my Goonies Pirates trailer online and emailed me about it to tell me how much he liked it. And that started this whole weird adventure. So the Goonies are at the core of everything.
You got an email from Dick Donner?
I did. It was amazing. I couldn't believe it. You're always afraid that they're going to say, "Thank you, take that down right now or we'll sue you." Right, something like that. But he said it just tickled his fancy, and he really liked it. So I'm just like, boy, I'm framing that one.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Now, I still smile thinking about that one.
So I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all of my guests. What advice would you give a filmmaker wanting to break into the business today?
Boy, I don't know, because I feel like I'm still trying to break into the business, to be honest. You should go ask a successful multimillionaire film producer that question, because if I knew the answer, I'd be doing it.
But you've been in the business for 10, 15 years now.
Yeah.
You're a little head of the film students. So your advice for that?
I do have an answer. If there's one field that you want to do, whether it's writing for scripted TV, writing features, or whatever you want to do in college, intern at the company you want to intern at in college. Okay. That will set you on the right foot for everything else that follows. So if you get an internship with, say, NBC Universal or on one of your favorite TV shows as an intern, you get to sit in the writer's room, you get to meet the people, you get to know how things work, and then they'll be more inclined to hire you as a PA. And once you're a PA, they'll be more inclined to hire you because you know all the ropes already. If you can get into the place you want to work early as an intern, do it, and that will set you on the right path.
That's great advice. It's exactly what I did in college. I worked at Universal in Florida.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so I was working in the back lot all throughout I actually skipped school to work for free. It was
that would be awesome. Yeah, I interned out here for a few companies, so I did it, but they were feature companies, and I just didn't end up doing features. So, but yeah. great experience, and that will help more than anything else.
Now, can you tell me what book had the biggest impact on your life or career?
I wasn't prepared for these questions.
I know you weren't.
No.
Do you have anything off the top of your head?
No. I don't. I will give a shout out. One book that pops to mind that I really, really enjoyed is Rebel Without a Crew.
Yeah, of course, Roberts.
But that's such a filmmaker go-to, sure. Because any book that details the horrible struggles of any other filmmaker, I want to read.
Amen, brother.
Because I want to know that every other filmmaker is having just as much of a miserable time as I did.
You know what?
And that's comforting. I don't say that to be mean. I say that as terms of comfort because making films is hard, and even successful people struggle with it. And I like knowing that.
You don't want to hear from somebody, I had a great time. It was easy.
No, because odds are they're lying, or they just had some kind of co-EP credit where they just show up once a week and walked around the set and home. Like, no, you weren't involved. You didn't do it. No.
Now
it's just like, yeah, like I want to know the real stories. And again, in making this film, one of the great things is that at the conventions, I get to meet a lot of the other indie filmmakers, and we all have the same stories about how hard it is in the studios and this and that. And it's just, and you realize that when things go wrong, mm-hmm. it's not that you're doing things wrong. That's simply part of the process. Like right. That's making a film. If things aren't going wrong, you're not making a film right.
That's a great tag. That's a great quote, sir.
Feel free to use it.
That's a great quote. Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film business or in life?
In this film, it's don't try to do everything yourself.
Okay.
That alone was the biggest mistake and the biggest hurdle that I kind of essentially threw up in front of myself. Was I took on way too much of this project by myself, and I wrote the film, I produced it, I shot it, I directed it, and I cut it, and I did all the graphics. I ran the Kickstarter, I designed the web page, I designed the DVD sleeve. Like I cut the trailers, yeah. I cut all the bonus features. Like I literally, and I say that not as a source of pride, but more of a source of embarrassment mm-hmm. that I didn't bring in more people. But at the time, this stuff takes a lot of time, and mm-hmm. people want to be paid, and I didn't have the money to pay people. And right. and then if they do it on their own time, it would have taken another 3 years to get done because they cut for 20 minutes here or an hour here, and I was on a deadline. So I ended up doing way too much by myself, and details were constantly kind of falling through the cracks and dropping. And it was just, the nature of trying to do too much as an individual. And having a team of like 2 or 3 people who are all equally dedicated, who all have an equal share in it, that will all support each other and not have anybody bail, I think is critical and makes things a lot easier because you can hand stuff off if you need to.
Now, what are 3 of your favorite films of all time?
Let's see.
Back to the Future.
I would put, actually, I would say on the top of the list, I'd put It's a Wonderful Life.
Okay.
Which is not unlike Back to the Future. It's seeing what happens in life without you, and a different path. And there's a little bit of time travel and mystery in there. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I would say that. And then, Back to the Future, definitely number 2. I would put Ghostbusters at number 3. I would put, the Star Wars, the original trilogy, somewhere, 4, Raiders 5, and then you just start getting into all the other, awesome
80s movies.
It's simply a list of 80s movies. I totally admit it.
It's a list,
again, I put Explorers up there. Even though the Alien third act is really weird and goofy, a little clownish, but I still love it. Mm-hmm. You can definitely tell that I grew up completely within the 80s, and that's. They're my favorite films, and
so that's why you must love Stranger Things.
You know what? I do.
So
I haven't finished second season. Don't spoil it, but I'm so savoring this one. I'm savoring it, going slow. I love. It's funny because when I watch Stranger Things, I think to myself, none of us made proton packs that look that good in the 80s.
That's true.
Like that's my. It's like we had cardboard boxes. None of ours looked that good.
I dressed up. I think it was the 6. I think it was 85. Actually, I think it was 85. I dressed up and we did a whole show on my school, and I was one of the Ghostbusters. And it did not look that good.
No, But it's so funny because all of my friends, like, obviously, since I made a movie about the restoration of the time machine, I have come to know a lot of very, very good fan prop makers, including all the Ghostbuster guys, all the Back to the Future guys, all the Aliens guys.
Sure.
And so, like, you know, their proton packs and stuff now are screen accurate, and like they have the full size ectos like in their yard. Like that's how big my friends are. But like, yeah, seeing like all of us have pictures of us in the 80s dressed just like those kids. Like, oh my God, I almost have that photo. Me and my friends dressed like Ghostbusters in the 80s. That's insane.
And that is the genius of the Duffer Brothers.
Yeah. That's, oh my God. Yeah. They got everything right on that one, you know, but again, I would love to know the story of how hard it was them to try to get the series made anywhere else. Those are the great stories of, you know, how Back to the Future was rejected by everybody, how Jaws almost didn't get made because they went, you know, over budget over time. The stories behind your favorite films of how they were disasters are the stories I love the most.
Absolutely. Now, where can people find you and find information about you, your work, and also the movie?
The movie, they can go to my website. It's outotimemovie.com, and Out of Time is spelled like the license plate. It's OUTATIME, outotimemovie.com. The movie is currently available on iTunes, Hulu, Vimeo, and it's also available on Blu-ray and DVD, and we ship worldwide. And it's all the links are available through the website. And if they want to email me, if they want to criticize my film, you know, tell me that filmmaking isn't that hard and that I'm wrong or that Explorers isn't awesome, they can contact me through the website because, as I said before, I run the website because I literally do everything related to the film. It comes straight to me. It's not some big team of people, although I wish it were.
Steve, man, thank you so much for taking the time out to do this, man. It's been an absolute pleasure geeking out with you and also talking shop with you, man.
Absolutely. And hey, I just want to say, keep up the good work. I love the podcasts. I love hearing other indie filmmakers' stories, and thank you for doing this. We appreciate it.
Oh, brother, thank you, man. I appreciate that. Man, it was great talking about Back to the Future a lot and having Steve on the show and really just discovering his whole journey of how he was able to put this kind of crazy film together. So, Steve, thank you again so much for being on the show. And if you guys want links to anything we discussed in this episode, just head over to indiefilmhustle.com/212. And also want to let you guys know that Udemy is having its New Year's Day resolution sale. Every single course on Udemy now is $10.99, including all of our Udemy courses. So just head over to indiefilmhustle.com/UDEMY and download as many of these courses as you can and get your new year off started right. We've got about 13, 14 courses up there as well. Got a couple of new ones about Facebook. If you want to get anything, really understand about Facebook, and also goal setting, how to set up your goals for 2018 and how to achieve those goals. We have those two new courses as well. So indiefilmhustle.com/Udemy. And as always, keep that hustle going, keep that dream alive, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Indie Film Hustle podcast at indiefilmhustle.com. That's INDIEFILMHUSTLE.com.